Thanks for joining us. The power of the written word can be life-changing. Almost all of us can remember childhood stories we read at school or while hiding under the covers at night when we were supposed to be sleeping. Books can transport us to other places, other cultures, and other eras. But many people don't find the time to read once they move into adulthood. Raising children and paying the bills takes priority, and reading very often falls along the wayside. The National Endowment for the Arts is out to help change that in America. It's launched a new project called the Big Read, and I'm so pleased to have with me today someone who knows a lot about books as a reader, a critic, and an author. David Kippen is also the Director of Literature for the National Endowment for the Arts. Welcome to Oklahoma.
Thank you very much, Jerry.
We're so glad to have you here. I have to tell you, though, I was pretty disturbed by some of the statistics I read about adults in America and how much or how little they read. Give us a little idea about that.
Oh, sure. You're right to be alarmed. The NEA came out with a study a couple of years ago that was piggybacked on the census in 2002, saying that fewer than half of Americans could answer yes to the question, did you read a book for fun last year? And it's called literary reading, but we're not sticklers about that. If you read the first page of a Danielle Steele novel and you gave up because it was too hard, you would have counted.
Oh, well, that's kind of sad,
and
isn't
yet,
it?
It's tragic, and yet fewer than half of Americans could say yes even to that.
Well, that's just fewer than half.
Yes.
Okay, and
47%.
I think I also read that there's a 7% decline over the last 10 years in adults reading any book.
Yeah.
At all.
Oh, yeah. Reading numbers are absolutely cratering at the moment. And as if that weren't terrifying enough, the numbers for young people are tanking even faster. The numbers for young guys are falling off a cliff. And that's why something like the Big Read, I think, is going to be so necessary.
All right. Well, let's talk about the Big Read. But in conjunction with that, the National Endowment for the Arts and what it actually does.
Oh, yeah.
And this is one of its projects.
National Endowment for the Arts came about in 1965. It's got disciplines not just for literature, which is my department, but also dance and opera and media arts and jazz. It's, an attempt to get the government a little bit more involved. I mean, we spend a fraction on the arts in America of what other countries do.
Really?
Oh, yeah. A very tiny fraction. But what we can do with the little money we do get, and it's less than we got a dozen years ago since, Congress tried to shut us down, is, use what little money we have as seed money. For every dollar we give in a grant, organizations around the country can leverage that into $7 more. They use those grants and they go and get matching grants because we run panels at the NEA which give a sort of stamp of approval to what people are doing. So we can use it as a lever to get more money to these organizations that so desperately need them at the local level.
All right, so the Big Read is one of these projects,
yeah,
and it's all involved with grants, right? Communities applying for grants?
Yes, the Big Read is a grant program whereby communities around the country can apply to the NEA for a little money, not a lot, just, you know, 10, 20,000, depending on how much, you know, how big a community is. And I've been to Enterprise, Oregon, population 1,700, which also had everybody reading The Grapes of Wrath, just like they're doing here in Oklahoma, in Norman and Stillwater. Well, it only takes a little money there, whereas compared to, you know, someplace like Miami, where they're reading Ernest Hemingway's Farewell to Arms, it takes considerably more money to break through and get people's attention. Because the idea here is you don't just want the local library running the program on its own lookout. I mean, I'm sure they can do a beautiful job, but what you see as you look at City Reads, and this isn't an original government idea, thank heaven. This is something that we swiped from Chicago and Seattle, which more or less pioneered the idea of an entire town reading one book and talking about it and organizing events around it. Those cities do it really well because they get everybody involved. Not just the library, though the library is indispensable, but also the mayor's office and the chambers of commerce and the local public and commercial television stations, public and commercial radio stations, the schools, the literary centers, everybody under the sun, so that, you know, during a month of concentrated events around the book, either you pretty much have to read the book or you got to leave town because you're ashamed you haven't read it.
So you have how many entire towns reading a particular book in America right now?
This spring, between January and June, we've got 72 communities reading any one of 8 books that we've created materials for, reader's guides and teacher's guides, and these wonderful educational CDs where you can listen to Sandra Day O'Connor talking about how To Kill a Mockingbird made her want to be a lawyer, or Robert Redford talking about what it was like to play Gatsby in The Great Gatsby.
Oh, wow.
We create all of these materials. In the fall, we're going to add another 130 communities so that by the end of the year, we're going to reach 200 communities in America talking about a book.
And getting adults to read those books.
Yes, adults
as well.
and kids. That's the thing here. I mean, you know, it's terrifying that young people aren't reading, and we're doing our darndest to reverse those trends. But I mean, if they're not getting it from their parents, if they're not being read to at night, if the parents themselves aren't reading for fun, I think as a society we suffer, and as an electorate, I mean, you know, you have to wonder about, you know, what sort of sophisticated votes people who don't read books can cast.
Now, you're here in Oklahoma because of 2 communities, actually one whole library system.
Yes, the Pioneer Library System showed me a wonderful time yesterday. They're doing wonderful programs. You go into a restaurant in Norman, Oklahoma, and there's any one of half a dozen placemats with excerpts from The Grapes of Wrath and commentary on it written by R.C. Davis of Oklahoma University, and it becomes a spur to conversation because the idea here is you want everybody in town not just reading a book by their lonesome, but talking about it, sharing it around town so that people have something more interesting in common than the weather.
I think you said nothing like reading a book with company.
Yes,
Best way.
Exactly. I mean, you know, I think of books I read back in college, and, you know, it would have been an impoverished experience by comparison if I were just, you know, back in my room reading them. That what made the difference was going to the seminar and talking about them and disagreeing about them and arguing about them, and that's what I hope I'm going to see more of tonight and tomorrow when I go to Stillwater, where they're also reading The Grapes of Wrath.
All right. The Grapes of Wrath was chosen by these communities.
Yes, they could have picked any one of those books that I'm talking about.
It's really an interesting choice from an Oklahoman standpoint because there are very mixed emotions about this book.
There are still mixed emotions about The Grapes of Wrath in California, especially Central California, where the book winds up, where I'm from. And I want to take this opportunity, for heaven's sake, to apologize on behalf of my fellow Californians for how we treated the Oklahomans who came to California in desperate straits in the 1930s after the Dust Bowl.
And that's really what Steinbeck is depicting, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, you know, I understand that this is a very ticklish book around here because the Jodes were reduced to very animalistic conditions. But for heaven's sake, that's not their fault. It was the Californians who treated them like animals. And the fact that they preserved their dignity to the end of this book is really a tribute to them and to all Oklahomans.
So is that the reaction you're getting?
It is. That's the wonderful thing. I was a little apprehensive as a Californian, as more recently a sort of G-man parachuting in from Washington, and knowing the history of this book a little bit and loving Steinbeck as I do. And yet they've really embraced it. I didn't know what to anticipate. And yet people have a perspective. Oklahoma's come so far in the last 70 years since the Dust Bowl that they don't need to have a chip on their shoulder about this anymore. People really recognize the book for the masterpiece that it is. They have their reservations about some of the dialect, and I can understand why, because Steinbeck, he caught the California dialect where he grew up in Monterey and Salinas beautifully, but the Oklahomans sound a little more generic. But the dialogue itself is just gorgeous.
Is there still an opportunity for people out there to get involved in these programs and for other communities to jump on board?
Absolutely, yes. There's another week or two left in the Pioneer Library System based in Norman, and also in the Stillwater community Big Read of the Grapes of Wrath. Stillwater is welcoming this fellow Timothy Egan, who wrote a book called The Worst Hard Time that just won the National Book Critics Circle Award, about how the Dust Bowl came about and what the consequences of it were. A wonderful work of nonfiction. Here I am promoting fiction reading on the Big Read, but it's a terrific work of nonfiction that everybody should read, and come and hear him on April the 12th. Tonight at 6:30, we're going to be screening The Grapes of Wrath at OSU in the Student Union, and I'm going to be driving people crazy talking over it the whole time. I'll try and hang back during the more dramatic scenes, but I'm also giving a little commentary because I'm a film critic on the side.
Okay, so other communities can jump on board.
Yes, they can apply. April 12th is also, in addition to Timothy Egan talking in Stillwater, it's the application deadline for the fall cycle of the Big Read. And I realize this doesn't leave a whole lot of time for people, so if they can't make that, that's okay. But next year, we go up to 400 communities nationwide, and I would love to see more applications from Oklahoma for the Grapes of Wrath, for...
yes, let's talk about the other books.
Yes, there's other books.
Because there were 8 this time, and there will be 12
Yes, the idea, we never pull a book off the list. We just keep adding to it.
Okay, give us some ideas, because people can run to the library and get these.
Absolutely. Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. The Great Gatsby I mentioned. Their Eyes Were Watching God. I'm so embarrassed.
I don't know that book.
I was the book critic for the San Francisco Chronicle for 7 years. I'm the director of literature. I'm the highest ranking literary officer in the country, for heaven's sake, and I hadn't read Their Eyes Were Watching God. It's by a terrific writer named Zora Neale Hurston, who was a sensation during the Harlem Renaissance. Then she fell out of print. Then Alice Walker, the woman who wrote The Color Purple, wrote an essay in Ms. Magazine that triggered a whole Hurston revival. And this is a wonderful book. With a whole lot to say to us now. And Katrina, it ends with a hurricane. It takes place largely in Florida, and it is a gorgeous, gorgeous, forgotten American novel that deserves to be resurrected. Okay, we only have a little time left. A few more of the books. Oh, sure. My Antonia by Willa Cather.
That is my absolute favorite.
Isn't that a glorious book?
Yes.
I was in a Big Read for that in Fergus Falls, Minnesota. It was freezing. It was February. 500 people came out. I mean, that's the inspiring thing about this. You know, if we can reverse the slide in American reading, that would be victory enough. But in my heart of hearts, there's a secret shadow goal to the Big Read, and that's to get Americans talking to each other again. I mean, you've seen the statistics, that Bowling Alone study that says, we're all, we're under the covers like you used to be, but we're not reading, we're listening to iPods, we're not talking to each other anymore. And that's what's wonderful about the Big Read, because, the books are a pretext. You want people to read, but just as important, you want them to come together. You want to sort of stitch up the fabric of community, which I think in large part has been lost around the country. Well, David Kippen, if you can't get people excited about books, I don't know who can. Thanks for coming to Oklahoma. Please come back. Oh, I wouldn't have missed it for anything. And we certainly...
Just 18, a letter came for him. He opened it to read, greetings from Uncle Sam. Your nation is at war, and we're gonna need your son. We'll furnish you a uniform, a backpack, and a gun. He shook his daddy's hand and kissed his mom goodbye, not knowing if he'd see them again. Without complaint or question, he sailed across the sea, 'cause he knew in his heart freedom wasn't free. And he did it all for you, did it all for me. Bled red, white, and blue, so this nation would be free. Though he was just a boy, he fell in the ranks. He fought like a man. For that we all say thanks to the boys and girls who gave so selflessly to preserve our liberty. Some of them came home, some died in foreign lands. Some were in a fight they couldn't win or understand. Some of them are there today on a path that's seldom trod, laying down their lives for this nation under God. And they do it all for you, they do it all for me. They bleed red, white, and blue, so this nation will be free. They leave their lives behind, they fall into the ranks, they make the sacrifice. For that we all say thanks to the boys and girls who give so selflessly to preserve our liberty. They fought in every war this nation has been in. For our way of living, they've given life and limb. The weight of our freedom is resting on their shoulders. So my hat's off to the American soldier, 'cause they do it all for you, they do it all for me. They bleed red, white, and blue, so this nation will be free. They leave their lives behind, they fall into the ranks, they make the sacrifice. For that we all say thanks to the boys and girls who give so selflessly to preserve our liberty. And to all who have fought so selflessly, thanks for liberty.
Pioneer Library System began its relationship with the Big Read in the Oklahoma Centennial year. 2007 was our first Big Read, and we were excited about the opportunity to share literature with our 3 counties in a deeper way. Libraries are many things, but we are still known for books.
Well, I think by its very nature, reading is a solitary, personal, sort of internal process that separates us from the world around us. You see evidence of that, with people walking around with their iPhones and pads, totally oblivious to the world around them. And reading has to be like that. But projects like the Big Read counteract that. They turn reading into more of a communal, social, convivial, festive party experience that brings people together.
The Big Read project reaches out to a very, very large community. In conjunction with the Big Read, where they brought in Amy Tan's book, and they were able to have book reading groups read the book and participate in all kinds of ways. They also had the Little Read.
Amy Tan made it easy because she had a children's book that was based on one of the chapters from the Joy Luck Club, and it's called The Moon Lady. So we did a children's Little Read with that book by the same author. And so children would come to the library, and that would be the focus of a story time activity with them. And then we did calligraphy workshops, and we taught them Tai Chi, and they made paper lanterns. The other thing that I really am proud of that Pioneer has started doing is we have started selecting books that have living authors. And we bring those authors to Oklahoma to meet with the people who have been reading their books. We expected her to be this fragile blossom, and indeed she was, and she's beautiful, but she was so funny. And she was kind of bawdy, and down to earth and hilarious, and we had so much fun just being in her presence and in her company and having her share so much of herself in such an unexpected way. We see that as a real opportunity to actually meet the people who are behind the words and the thoughts that have been put in our heads when we read their work.
It's an exciting way to approach the process of reading and what books do and the importance of literature in our lives. But when you come to Big Read events, you suddenly realize that we are all a part of this same family.
We think that people who read literature are better community members, are more empathetic citizens, more engaged. But it also, I think, helps us give our citizens and the customers we serve an opportunity to be better citizens.
Let's talk about Old School, which has been featured in Big Read's Pioneer Library System, brought you to Oklahoma. How would you describe that novel to people who haven't had a chance to read it yet?
It's a novel about friendship, about vocation. It's about the virtues and the costs of competition. And it's not least of all about the operations of class in our society.
What do you want readers to take away from it?
Well, I would hope, first of all, a love of a kind of reawakened love of reading and literature and a sense of its value and how central it can be to life.
not give it credence that a 14-year-old girl could leave home and go off in the wintertime to avenge her father's blood. But it did not seem so strange then, although I will say it did not happen every day.
Maddie Ross, or any teenage girl who lived in the latter half of the 1800s, would have been very different from a teenage girl today. Could you imagine leaving home and traveling to an unknown place, living off the resources of the land? Although True Grit is a novel of fiction, there are truths to the locations and characters in the novel. Maddie Ross is an extraordinary character of rare independence and strength. Her journey through Arkansas and Indian Territory searching for the murderer Tom Chaney is a fascinating tale of fact and fiction during the Old West period. Through our journey, we will use Maddie's words to follow the path, learn about the characters, and break apart the fact from fiction.
We had clear title to 480 acres of good bottom land on the south bank of the Arkansas River, not far from Dardanelle in Yell County.
Yale County currently has a population of 22,000 people. At the time of the novel, the population was around 6,000. One of the major landmarks in Dardanelle is Dardanelle Rock. Running along the Arkansas River since the region was first explored, it was used as a lookout point for Indians and Confederate soldiers. In Maddie's time, this may have been just another rock formation, but today it is noted as one of Arkansas's natural areas.
From our place to Fort Smith was about 70 miles as the bird flies, taking you past beautiful Mount Nebo, where we had a little summer house so Mama could get away from the mosquitoes, and also Mount Magazine, the highest point in Arkansas, but it might as well have been 700 miles for all I knew of Fort Smith.
The view from the train car could not have done justice to the mountain ranges. Mount Nebo was a prominent landmark for navigation on the Arkansas River and is the state's second oldest state park. Mount Magazine has a rich history dating back to the Archaic period, 9500 to 650 BC.
I thought then and still think that Fort Smith ought to be in Oklahoma instead of Arkansas, though of course it was not Oklahoma across the river then, but the Indian Territory. They have that big wide street there called Garrison Avenue, like places out in the West.
Fort Smith during this time was a rough and rollicking town. Disease was rampant, people were hungry, and with dirt streets, the dust and mud left the town dirty and the residents uncomfortable. Garrison Avenue was the central hub of the town. Some of the original structures still stand on Garrison, but the town was struck by a devastating tornado in 1996, so many of the buildings have been refurbished.
You will think it's strange, but I scarcely heard of Judge Isaac Parker at the time, famous man that he was.
Maddie first encounters Rooster in the infamous Judge Isaac Parker's courthouse. The original courthouse and jail still stands but has been preserved as a historic site. During Judge Parker's 21-year tenure, a total of 160 death sentences were handed down, 79 of which were executed on the gallows scaffold on the southeast corner of the courthouse. Today, you can still see the remaining traces of the old fort wall, which was put in place by the U.S. Army.
They tell me you are a man with true grit.
Although there was a man at the time named John Franklin Rooster Cogburn, it is said that the character from the novel was created from several of the known U.S. Marshals in the Old West, including Cal Whiteson, Heck Thomas, and Bass Reeves. Cal Whiteson only had one eye after being wounded while serving in the Army. Heck Thomas had been credited for bringing law and order to the Indian Territory. Bass Reeves was the first African-American deputy west of the Mississippi River and could speak several Indian languages. The real Rooster was never a U.S. Marshal. He was, however, found guilty in 1889 on a conspiracy charge to murder and sentenced to 2 years in the Ohio State Penitentiary.
Toward the end of the meal, a stranger came in wearing 2 revolvers and made known that he was seeking room and board. He was a nice-looking man, around 30 years of age, with a cowlick at the crown of his head. His manner was stuck up, and he had a smug grin that made you nervous when he turned it on you.
Texas Ranger LaBeef is a fictional character in the book, but the Texas Rangers were a big part of law enforcement in the Old West and noted as the oldest law enforcement agency in the United States. The Rangers were also responsible for supplying their own equipment, including horses and firearms.
About 50 yards below the ferry slip, the river narrowed and I aimed for the place, going like blazes across a sandbar. We hit the river running and Blackie snorted and arched his back against the icy water, but once he was in, he swam as though he was raised to it.
This would not have been as easy as it sounds. The Arkansas River is a large body of water, over 5,000 feet, between the bank of Fort Smith and Indian Territory. Seeing a 14-year-old girl ride her trusted horse across the water would have been a sight to see, even in the Old West.
Now I will say something about the land. Some people think the present state of Oklahoma is all treeless plains. They are wrong. The eastern part, where we are traveling, is hilly and fairly well timbered with post oak and blackjack and similar hard scrub.
Heading northwest on the Fort Gibson Trail into Choctaw Nation, the trio passed a few travelers. Several tribes occupied the land, including the Choctaw, Cherokee, and Creek. The land was considered lawless, but the Choctaw Light Horse Police, although a small group, could make arrests and enforce liquor laws within the Choctaw Nation. They had no jurisdiction over non-Choctaw, but they could apprehend criminals and turn them over to U.S. Marshals.
Along about noon, we stopped at a stream on the lee side of a mountain to water the horses. There we found some relief from the wind and snow. I believe these were the Sand Boys Mountains.
Considered to be a small mountain range in southeastern Oklahoma, Sand Boys Mountain is part of the Wichita Mountains and is now part of the Forestry Service. Robbers Cave is in the middle of the mountain range and received its name from reports that the cave was used as a hideout for several outlaws. Prehistoric hunter-gatherers and foragers roamed and settled eastern Oklahoma and the Sand Boys Mountains about 8,000 to 1,000 BC.
It was only an hour's ride to the Texas Road. We made quite a caravan. If you had chance to be riding up the Texas Road on that bright December morning, you would have met 2 red-eyed peace officers and a sleepy youth from near Dardanelle, Arkansas, riding south at a walk and leading 7 horses.
Texas Road was the oldest road in Indian Territory and served as a trade route to Texas and was used to transport cattle to the north. The route would also be followed by the tracks of the Missouri, Kansas, and Texas Railroad. Traces of the road can still be seen in McAllister, but also pass near Fort Gibson, Eufaula, and Durant.
We reached J.J. McAllister's store about 10 o'clock that morning. The railroad tracks ran behind it. There was little more to the place than the store building and a few smaller frame and log structures of poor description. And yet, if I am not mistaken, this was at the time one of the best towns in the Choctaw Nation. The store is now part of the modern little city of McAllister, Oklahoma, where for a long time coal was king.
James Jackson McAllister started his store in a tent in 1869 where Texas Road and a California trail crossed, known as the Crossroads. 3 years later, he married the daughter of a prominent Chickasaw family, which allowed him citizenship in the nation, and he was able to control the coal land claims. Years later, he was elected as a lieutenant governor of Oklahoma and served as acting governor during the absence of Governor Lee Cruz. When Mattie arrived, less than 3,000 people occupied the area. Today, the town has a population of almost 18,000 residents.
Nor did I enjoy the slipping and sliding of the winding stair mountains. There is a lot of thick pine timber in those hills, and we wandered up and down in the double darkness of the forest.
Navigating in the dark would not have been an easy task for a skilled rider, let alone a 14-year-old in an unknown area. Winding Stair was designated as a National Recreation Area in 1988. This includes the Talamina Drive, the 54-mile scenic byway where panoramic views allow you to take in a variety of trees, and in the fall, a kaleidoscope of color.
The man was none other than Tom Cheney. You may readily imagine that I registered shock at the sight of that squat assassin. I stood there fixed.
Tom Cheney may be a fictitious character in the novel, but just like in the case of Rooster, there was an outlaw named Frank Cheney. Frank was a part of several bank robberies while riding in Henry Starr's gang. A posse near Eagletown in Indian Country killed him in 1894.
Cheney picked up a stick and pitched it into a big crack in the ledge. He said, "There is a ball of rattlesnakes down there in that pit, and I'm going to throw you in it. How do you like that?"
Many people believe that there was a viper pit in the Winding Stair Mountain, but it was actually located in the Arbuckle Mountains. In 1833, a Texas horse thief kidnapped and murdered a 16-year-old woman and threw her body into a rattlesnake pit in the mountain.
I have no recollection of the stop at the Poteau River, where Rooster commandeered a wagon and a team of mules from a party of hunters at gunpoint.
Rooster's heroic descent down Winding Stair, past Lake Wister, through Poteau, and back to Fort Smith saved Mattie's life. The area around Lake Wister had been inhabited for thousands of years. There are numerous mounds in the area that were created by prehistoric Native Americans. The lake is created by the inflow of the Poteau River and the Fouche-Malin Creek. The Poteau River is the only state river that runs north, and it flows into the Arkansas River in Fort Smith.
In late May of 1903, Little Frank sent me a cutting from the Commercial Appeal in Memphis. It was an advertisement for the Cole Younger and Frank James Wild West show that was coming to play in the Memphis Chicks baseball park.
Many outlaws use their notoriety to make a living by performing in carnivals and Wild West shows. Cole Younger and Frank James traveled the country by train, performing their show. Charles Portis's southern roots and skillful writing come together to create this epic novel. From the moment you begin reading, you are on the journey into the American frontier with Mattie, Rooster, and LaBeef, anxiously awaiting the next adventure in Indian Territory. True Grit is quirky, straight, and unflinching, much like Mattie Ross.